When we first started working on the land, it was just overrun with invasive plants. It was a fallow farm field that originally belonged to over 100 acres, and this had been parceled off to 14 acres. The barn roofs were covered with poison ivy and mugwort, and thistle and bindweed was taking over, and the soil under the pecan was extremely compacted. So we really set out to understand how to manage landscapes with as minimal inputs as possible. But we've learned some really great lessons. We have a lot of wild landscape surrounding this very curated garden we have. All that weed pressure is constantly blowing in here. And so what's become really critical is to plant densely here and to identify perennial weeds and spend resources targeting them, and to really relax about the annual weed pressure. Because the perennials we grow here will run over those in time, and if we can have layers that come on earlier in the season, even if they're cool season plants, sedges, some of our native carex, or cosmopolitan plants like cecilarias. Some of the other pressure we had in the garden were areas of compaction. There were trucks backing in here from the previous owner. And so we relied heavily on calcium and humates. And the humates are really important in terms of developing mycorrhizae in the landscape. And they are kind of the biological drills to really open up soils long term. Calcium also tends to be depleted in the mid-Atlantic here, certainly through the Midwest as well, and that's a large particle that generally will bind with magnesium and open up the soil profile also. We've also found that just by providing drainage at the crown of plants that otherwise were rotting in this garden, in this heavy compacted soil, they started standing up and thriving and seeding into the landscape. And that came in the form of us just throwing aggregate on the ground. I was using 3/8 inch angular gravel. We just throw it around the plants, I mean with shovelfuls. And all of a sudden plants like Hellebore fetidus that were rotting, started greening up, and tons of little seedlings would start germinating. I think my main design strategy in the landscape starts really with thinking about placemaking, even before the plants. I'm really always thinking about the experience of moving through a garden and how the circulation should just be intuitive and casual, and always allowing for moments where people can just congregate and relax. We hear all these birds, and the light can be different depending on where you're sitting, and I want to allow for all those opportunities. For planting, I'm always just trying to take cues from, like, what is this cultural landscape right here? Is there a little pocket, and what would grow there, and how would that relate to the context of the rest of the planting around it? So it seems seamless and fluid. But I'm more often responding to the soil, light, hydrologic conditions of this immediate acute place in the landscape. And then what can I get my hands on, right? Because we can all say, oh, we want this specialty rhubarb that someone's growing in Oregon, but can you even get that? We did start a nursery so we can start securing our own materials. And these kind of oddball plants we can start to learn about and work with in the garden. Early in, if you can call it a career, and it has been, you know, this is almost 30 years I've been doing this on my own. I was really looking to build bigger gardens with very limited budgets I had at the time. We relied on plants that were highly competitive, large plants to cover a lot of real estate. And the last few years I started thinking about, all right, well, what happens in ecology? Well, plants just spontaneously grow, and so we looked at things like Chamaecrista, partridge pea, where we're trying to stabilize slopes quickly. It's very affordable to bring a plant like that in and seed it out directly into the landscape until the perennials can take hold and then do their job of really stabilizing. And what happens in succession is that the forbs come on quickly and they're very showy and they bring the pollinators in, and then they develop a seed bank and then they retract as the perennials push them out. And if there's disturbance, whether that's fauna, rutting, or eating, or there's fire, that seed bank of the forbs will flush back in and stabilize the ground plane. And so we're looking at a lot of botanic annuals and even culinary plants to not only be a real pleasure to experience in the landscape, but also to function in developing a more resilient plant community. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface the last couple of years, but I'm fascinated by it. You know, we're not here to create window dressing. We're here to live and to have this rich life and to experiment and explore. You know, our clients tend to be gardeners, and maybe they're a little uncomfortable for how to compose plants, but they understand what the value of living in a garden is.